I never thought the happiest day of my life would turn into my worst nightmare in a matter of seconds. But that's exactly what happened on a warm September morning in Seattle, when I gave birth to my beautiful daughter, only to have my husband look at her and say, "I'm not signing anything. That child isn't mine." My name is Emma Chen, and I'm 64 years old now. But the story I'm about to tell you happened when I was 28, at a time when I thought I had my whole life figured out. Looking back, I realize how naive I was, how blind love can make you, how easily trust can be weaponized against you. I grew up in Bellevue, in one of those pristine neighborhoods where every lawn looks like it belongs in a magazine. My father owned a successful chain of medical supply stores, and my mother came from old Seattle money. I was their only child, and they had certain expectations for me: private schools, the right college, the right career, and eventually, the right marriage. I became an elementary school teacher, which disappointed them slightly. They'd hoped I'd become a doctor or a lawyer, but I loved working with children. There was something pure about their curiosity, their honesty, their capacity to forgive and start fresh every day. That's where I met Daniel. Not at school, but at a charity fundraiser my parents hosted every year. Daniel wasn't one of the wealthy donors. He was there serving drinks, working for the catering company. He was 29, handsome in an understated way, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold 1,000 stories. While everyone else at that party talked about stock portfolios and vacation homes, Daniel talked about books, about dreams, about wanting to make something of himself. My parents had actually been the ones who gave him his big break years earlier. When Daniel was 19, fresh out of high school with no money for college, my father had offered him a scholarship through their foundation. Daniel studied business administration, worked part-time throughout college, and graduated with honors. He'd always been grateful to my family, and my parents pointed to him as one of their success stories. When Daniel and I started dating, my parents weren't thrilled. My mother said, "Emma dear, he's a nice young man, but you come from different worlds." My father was more direct. "He's grateful now, but gratitude can turn to resentment. Be careful." I didn't listen. I was in love. Daniel was different from the entitled men I'd grown up around. He was humble, hardworking, and he treated me like I was precious. We dated for 2 years before he proposed, and despite my parents' reservations, we got married in a small ceremony at a vineyard outside the city. The first year of marriage was beautiful. We lived in a modest apartment in Capitol Hill, and I continued teaching while Daniel worked as a financial analyst at a mid-size firm. My parents had offered to buy us a house, but Daniel insisted we do it on our own. "I need to provide for my wife," he'd said with such pride that I didn't push it. Then I got pregnant. It wasn't planned, but we were both overjoyed. Daniel seemed nervous but excited. His mother, Patricia, was ecstatic. She was a widow who'd raised Daniel alone after his father died when Daniel was just 5. She'd sacrificed everything for him, working 2 jobs to keep them afloat before my parents' scholarship came along. Patricia and I had always had a cordial relationship, but something shifted during my pregnancy. She became more involved, more opinionated. She'd show up unannounced with parenting books, baby items, advice I didn't ask for. "Daniel was such an easy baby," she'd say. "I hope yours is too." Of course, I did everything right, not like these modern mothers. There was an edge to her comments that I couldn't quite place. Daniel would just laugh it off. "That's just mom being mom," he'd say. "She means well." Around my 7th month of pregnancy, strange things started happening. I'd find my phone moved, even though I'd left it on the charger. Messages would be marked as read when I hadn't opened them. I mentioned it to Daniel once, and he said I was probably just pregnancy brain. Then came the photos. I started getting anonymous text messages with pictures of me having coffee with my colleague, James. James was gay and happily married to his husband, but the texts would come with messages like, "Who's this? And does your husband know?" I showed them to Daniel, and he was furious. "Who would do this?" he demanded. I had no idea. I blocked the number, but then another one would start. Different number, same harassment. In my 8th month, the messages escalated. Someone had photoshopped pictures to make it look like James and I were holding hands, embracing. They were obvious fakes, but they were disturbing. Daniel saw one and his face went pale. "Emma, I trust you," he said, "but this is getting out of hand." I went to the police, but they said without a credible threat, there wasn't much they could do about harassment. I felt helpless, violated. My pregnancy should have been a joyful time, but instead, I was looking over my shoulder constantly. My parents wanted me to hire a private investigator. "Someone's targeting you," my mother said. "This isn't random." But I was too tired, too overwhelmed. I just wanted to get through the pregnancy and deal with it later. September 15th. I went into labor at 4 in the morning. Daniel drove me to Swedish Medical Center, the same hospital where I'd been born. The contractions were intense, and I was scared, but Daniel held my hand the whole time. "You're doing amazing," he kept saying. "I love you so much." 12 hours later, our daughter was born. 7 pounds, 3 ounces, perfect, tiny fingers and toes, dark hair like her father. When they placed her in my arms, I cried. She was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. "Do you want to hold her?" I asked Daniel, exhausted but elated. He looked at her, and something in his expression changed. It wasn't the awe I expected. It was something colder, harder. "Daniel?" I said. He turned to his mother, who'd been in the waiting room and had come in after the delivery. Patricia's face was unreadable. "I need to talk to you," Daniel said to me, his voice flat, alone. Patricia left, but not before giving me a look I couldn't interpret. The nurse took the baby to check her vitals, and suddenly the room felt very cold despite the warm September day outside. "What's wrong?" I asked. Daniel pulled out his phone. "I've been doing some thinking," he said, "about all those photos. About how you've been acting." "Acting?" "Daniel, I haven't. I had someone look into it," he interrupted. "The metadata on those photos, they were taken by someone who had access to your location, your schedule, someone close to you." My heart was pounding. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that James works at your school. I'm saying you spend a lot of time with him. I'm saying those photos aren't as fake as you claimed." I felt like I'd been slapped. "Daniel, James is gay. You've met his husband." "That's convenient, isn't it?" His voice was rising now. The perfect cover story. "This is insane," I said, tears streaming down my face. "I just gave birth to our daughter, Daniel." "Did you?" he said quietly. "Because I've been counting, Emma. We got married 2 years ago. You got pregnant 14 months ago. But I remember exactly when we started trying. And the timing doesn't quite add up." "What are you talking about?" I was shaking now, from exhaustion, from shock, from disbelief. He pulled up a calendar on his phone. "I was away at a conference in Denver that week, the week you would have gotten pregnant based on your due date. Remember? The medical supply conference your father sent me to?" My mind was reeling. "Daniel, due dates aren't exact. The doctor said she could be off by a week or 2 either way." "Convenient," he said again. The nurse came back with our daughter. "Time to fill out the birth certificate," she said cheerfully, oblivious to the tension in the room. "Dad, I'll need your signature here." Daniel looked at the baby. At me. Then he said, loud enough for the nurse to hear, "I'm not signing anything. I need a paternity test first." The nurse's smile faltered. "Oh, I see. Well, that's certainly your right. But that child isn't mine," Daniel said, his voice hard as stone. I couldn't breathe. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. Patricia appeared in the doorway, as if she'd been waiting for her cue. "Daniel, sweetheart, let's not make a scene." "I'm not making a scene," he said. "I'm protecting myself from fraud." "Fraud?" I choked out. "Daniel, I've never been unfaithful to you. Not once. Not ever." He turned to his mother. "Mom, you saw the photos. You were the one who suggested I look into the metadata." Everything clicked into place, the phone being moved. The messages marked as read. Patricia had a key to our apartment. She'd been there many times when I wasn't home. "It was you," I whispered, looking at Patricia. "You sent those messages. You created those photos." Patricia's face remained calm, but her eyes were cold. "I don't know what you're talking about, dear. I'm simply looking out for my son." "Why?" I asked. "Why would you do this?" "Daniel, let's go," Patricia said, ignoring me. "We can stay at my place until this gets sorted out." "I'm not going anywhere until Daniel started." "We're leaving," Patricia said firmly. Now, I watched, helpless, as my husband walked out of the hospital room, without signing the birth certificate, without holding his daughter, without even looking back. The nurse patted my shoulder awkwardly. "I'm so sorry," she said. "This happens more than you'd think. We can leave the father's name blank for now." I held my newborn daughter and sobbed. She made little mewing sounds, completely unaware that her father had just abandoned her. My parents came as soon as I called them. My mother held the baby while my father made phone calls. "We're hiring the best attorney in Seattle," he said, "and a private investigator. We'll get to the bottom of this." "I already know the bottom of it," I said tiredly. "Patricia did this. I don't know how she faked those photos, but she did." "But why?" my mother asked, rocking the baby gently. I had been thinking about that. Patricia had always resented that my family had money, despite Daniel's scholarship, despite my father helping him get his first real job, despite us paying for half the wedding. Patricia always had a chip on her shoulder. She'd make little comments about those who have everything handed to them or people who don't know the value of $1. And then I remembered something. A conversation I'd overheard 3 months earlier when Patricia didn't know I was home. She'd been on the phone with someone, talking about Daniel's future. "He deserves better than someone who'll always hold her family's money over his head," she'd said. "He needs someone who understands our world, someone like your Melissa." Melissa, Patricia's best friend's daughter. I'd met her once at a family gathering. She'd just gotten divorced from a tech executive, walked away with millions in the settlement. Patricia hadn't wanted Daniel to marry me. She'd tolerated it, waited, and then she'd found her opportunity. If Daniel divorced me while I had a newborn, if he could prove infidelity, he could potentially get a large settlement. My family had insisted on a prenup that protected my trust fund, but our joint assets had grown considerably, and there was the house my parents had finally convinced us to accept as a gift. But more than that, Patricia wanted control. She wanted Daniel back under her influence, away from my family, away from me. I named my daughter Lily. Lily Grace Chen. I left the father's name blank on the birth certificate. The next few weeks were the hardest of my life. I was recovering from childbirth, learning to be a mother, and dealing with the complete implosion of my marriage. Daniel moved back in with Patricia. He refused to see me or the baby. His attorney sent a letter demanding a paternity test and filing for divorce on grounds of adultery. My father's private investigator, a sharp woman named Carol Kim, got to work immediately. She discovered that the harassing text messages had come from burner phones purchased at various stores in Seattle. She pulled security footage from one of the stores and found Patricia making the purchase, using cash. The photos were trickier. They'd been well done, skillfully photoshopped. Carol traced the editing metadata and found they'd been created on a computer at a FedEx office location near Patricia's work. More security footage showed Patricia at the computer station, working on something intently. But the real breakthrough came when Carol looked into Patricia's internet history, obtained through a subpoena. Patricia had been researching divorce settlements, community property laws, and even how to prove infidelity without evidence. My attorney, Margaret Song, was a force of nature. "She's going to regret this," Margaret said grimly as she reviewed the evidence. "What she did is defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and possibly fraud." The paternity test came back, of course, proving Daniel was Lily's father. Margaret had it delivered to Daniel's office by courier, with a note. "Your daughter would like to meet you." Daniel showed up at my parents' house 2 days later. I was staying there with Lily, unable to face going back to the apartment we'd shared. He looked terrible. Thinner, dark circles under his eyes. He stood in the doorway, staring at me holding Lily. "Emma," he said, "I'm so sorry. I don't know what I was thinking." Mom showed me the photos, and she kept saying things, planting doubts, and "She manipulated you," I said quietly. "But you let her. You chose to believe I was capable of that instead of trusting me." "I know," he said, tears in his eyes. "I know. Can I hold her, please?" I should have said no, but he was her father, so I let him hold his daughter for the first time. He broke down crying, apologizing over and over. "I want to make this right," he said. "I want to be a family again." "That's not possible," I said. He looked up at me, shocked. "Emma, please. I made a terrible mistake. We can get counseling. We can fix this. Your mother tried to destroy me, I said. She fabricated evidence, harassed me, turned you against me, and you believed her. You looked at our newborn daughter and rejected her. Do you understand what that did to me? What it will do to her if she ever finds out? She won't find out, Daniel said desperately. We can move forward. We can. I'm filing a lawsuit against your mother, I interrupted, for defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and fraud. My attorney says we have an airtight case. Daniel's face went pale. Emma, you can't. She's my mother. And Lily is your daughter. The daughter you abandoned. Make your choice, Daniel. He made it. He chose his mother. He begged me not to sue, offered to sign the birth certificate, offered to pay child support, anything if I would just leave his mother alone. I refused. Margaret filed the lawsuit 3 days later. The trial took 8 months. Patricia denied everything at first, but the evidence was overwhelming. The security footage, the computer records, the text message logs, her internet search history. Even her own son had to testify, admitting under oath that his mother had been the one to show him the photos and suggest the paternity test. The most damning moment came when Carol, the private investigator, revealed something we'd discovered late in the process. Patricia had been embezzling money from the small accounting firm where she worked. Not a lot, just enough to fund her scheme and build up a nest egg. When we looked into her finances, we found she'd been planning this for over a year. She'd even consulted with a divorce attorney months before I got pregnant, asking hypothetical questions about adultery and divorce settlements. The jury found in my favor. Patricia was ordered to pay $200,000 in damages. She was also fired from her job, and criminal charges were filed for the embezzlement and for electronic harassment. Daniel came to see me after the verdict. He looked broken. I don't know how to fix this, he said. My mother is probably going to prison. My marriage is over. I've destroyed everything. No, I said. Your mother destroyed things, and you let her because you were too weak to stand up for your wife and child. I want to be in Lily's life, he said. Please. She's my daughter. Yes, she is, I agreed, and she deserves a father. But that father needs to be someone who chooses her first. Can you do that? It took time. A lot of time. Daniel went to therapy. He cut off contact with his mother, which I never actually asked him to do, but which he said he needed to do for himself. He started with supervised visitations with Lily, just an hour a week at a child-friendly location with a social worker present. I watched him play with her, read to her, sing to her. I saw genuine love in his eyes, but I also saw the man who had looked at her on the day she was born and rejected her. I couldn't unsee that. Patricia was sentenced to 18 months in prison for the embezzlement and electronic harassment charges. She never apologized. At her sentencing, she stood up and said, I was only trying to protect my son from making a mistake. The judge said, the only mistake your son made was listening to you. As for Daniel and me, we never got back together. We divorced quietly, with a custody agreement that gave me primary custody and Daniel generous visitation rights. He pays child support, though I don't need it. He's remarried now to a kind woman who teaches art at the community college. They have a son, Lily's half-brother. Lily is 36 years old now. She knows her father, loves him even, though their relationship has always had a certain distance to it. She knows the full story. I told her when she was old enough to understand, because I believed she deserved the truth. She asked me once, when she was 22, if I ever regretted fighting so hard, if maybe it would have been easier to just let it go, to forgive Patricia and Daniel and move on. I told her what I believe to this day, that love shouldn't require you to accept betrayal, that trust, once broken in such a fundamental way, can never be fully restored, and that standing up for yourself, even when it's hard, even when it costs you, is the greatest gift you can give your children. Lily just graduated with her doctorate in child psychology. She works with families in crisis, helping parents and children heal from trauma. She says she was inspired by her own story, by watching me fight for her even when she was too young to understand. I'm 64 now. I never remarried, though I dated a wonderful man for nearly 10 years before he passed away from cancer. I retired from teaching 5 years ago. I have a small house on Bainbridge Island with a garden where I grow tomatoes and roses. Sometimes, on quiet mornings, I think about that day in the hospital, the happiest moment of my life turning into the worst. And I think about how I chose, in that moment and every moment after, to fight. Not for revenge, though some might call it that, but for justice, for truth, for my daughter's right to grow up knowing that her mother would always, always protect her. Patricia got out of prison after serving 14 months. She lives alone in a small apartment in Tacoma. Daniel helps her financially, but they rarely speak. She's never met her granddaughter, and at Lily's request, she never will. Daniel asked me a few years ago if I thought I'd made the right choice, pursuing the lawsuit. "You destroyed my mother's life," he said, not accusingly but almost wonderingly. "No," I told him. "Your mother destroyed her own life the moment she decided to fabricate evidence against your wife. I just made sure she faced consequences for it." He nodded slowly. "You're right," he said. "You're absolutely right. That's the thing about justice. It's not always comfortable. It's not always neat. It doesn't always lead to reconciliation and happy endings. Sometimes justice means holding people accountable, even when it's family. Especially when it's family. Lily is engaged now to a wonderful man who adores her. They're planning a wedding for next summer. Daniel will walk her down the aisle, and I'll be sitting in the front row, watching my daughter beam with happiness. And I'll remember that day 36 years ago when I held her for the first time and promised her that I would always fight for her, always protect her, always choose her. That's a promise I've kept, and I'd make the same choice again, every single time.